actually for us. They're for, their donors and stuff. So please refrain from drinking those. We do have, like lemonade and iced tea at lunch. But, you know, maybe we'll look into getting some more drink alternatives, because I know people like bubbly water a lot, so we'll work on that. Also, let's see, what other things have happened? Anyone go to the South Platte Forum? I think I saw anybody there. Yeah. That was actually I thought that was great. Were you guys there? No? Did you go? Yeah, I thought that was a really great gathering.
It is, it's always, a different perspective.
Yeah.
Moderns.
Right.
Yeah, and they do a great job, so.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it this year. Did anyone else attend any other water events?
Bryce and I went to the speaker that you had.
Oh, the Norman lecture.
Yeah, that was really
At
interesting,
Mulroy.
especially because we went the afternoon after we were at Northern Water. So we have two very different opinions about a current situation.
Yeah, it was interesting.
It's very interesting.
What stood out to you about that talk?
Well, we had kind of been prepped in our meeting with Northern Water that the viewpoints about what the Northern Basin and the Southern Basin were doing. And then she showed up really kind of defending the position of the Southern Basin. And so not having a lot of personal knowledge, that stood as quite a contrast to people effectively speaking about their opinion about what is happening, what should happen next. That's what I found the most interesting.
Yeah.
As a layperson.
What did you think, Bryce?
Pat's explanation of all the efforts that the lower basin has done over the years was pretty expansive, but I felt like the tone I was left with was kind of dejected and like, hey, so we get on the same page, this water management from the headwaters of Colorado to California, everyone's affected by that. It's gonna be hard over the next few years and almost to a point where we have to look at outside resources.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality of it, unless we all work.
Yeah, she was kind of promoting the desalinization in the,
Yeah.
especially in California, which, yeah, makes sense.
But I think it's fair to, you know, have that be the reality of it and express the magnitude of what we have in front of us and the decisions we have to make and how we need to manage things and not take it lightly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. You came away with that, Kara.
Was I wrong?
Well, I kind of came up because Pat Mulroy she's retired from her roles and she kind of says whatever she wants.
She really
Which
did.
I think she's kind of always done, but she really does so now. And so she was like, she's basically like, it's on all of us to figure it out. I didn't really think she was blaming the upper basin necessarily or saying like we needed to do more, but maybe I was wishfully thinking.
I thought maybe you were saying you're not giving us credit for the things that we are doing.
Yeah.
And what I heard Northern Water say was they need to do more.
Right.
That was the.
Everyone. So after this, there was the Colorado River Water Users Association meeting. Are people familiar with what that is? It's this big, huge gathering in Las Vegas every year where, all of the negotiators on the Colorado River Basin get together. And they usually have conversations and negotiate, especially in like side meetings and all these things. And like nothing happened at that meeting. Like no one talked to each other and everyone was basically like, you guys need to do more. So yeah, it didn't seem to, it seems like we're not going anywhere fast right now. So
There's some good articles there from Alex Hagerman.
Yeah.
On that recent conference.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna get started. So yeah, I guess one of the things I also in talking with Pat Mulroy before and after the event was she was talking about we need a strong leader right now to bring the basins together and to drive innovation. And she wasn't seeing that necessarily. But it really highlights the need for leaders, both kind of in our own communities and regionally and like multi-state. We need people who are thinking outside of the box and like coming up with solutions and talking to each other, to find ways forward. So that's what we're gonna do. That's why we're here. And I'm excited today to have our talks today are focused on kind of the municipal aspects of water supply and demand. And we're gonna hear from a whole range of folks, from small to larger, folks that have lots of water supply, folks that don't have much water supply and are growing. And then we're gonna hear from Lisa Darling is coming for our leadership challenge. Always a really interesting perspective, and I'm hoping to kind of ask some questions about the South Metro Water Supply Authority and how that functions as kind of a more regional water association. Then we have our book club presentations at the end, so I hope you're all ready. But I will go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Thanks, Todd and Shane, for being here. But Todd, are you good to go first?
Sure.
Okay. So Todd is a water resources manager at the city of Loveland. He served as the manager since December 2020. He's originally from Wyoming, has a bachelor and master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Wyoming. And they fled Laramie's harsh winters, came to Colorado. His previous experience is in the consulting world, where he has 35 years specializing in water resources engineering, infrastructure development, and tribal water rights settlement negotiations. So thank you, Todd, for being here, and take it away.
Gonna talk real quick, a little bit, do a little bit of background about what our situation is at the city of Loveland. And then move into some of the issues that we're facing and dealing with right now. And as I go through this, keep it informal. If you have questions, feel free to interject or raise your hand for whatever answer. It's pretty high level because we don't have a whole lot of, but hopefully it'll still be interesting for you. Loveland, strategically, in terms of our overarching strategic plan, in terms of the security of our water resources, has always kind of adopted the philosophy that we get half of our water from the western slope and half of our water from the eastern slope, that gives us some resiliency. It's debatable to some extent, as we'll kind of get into. They are certainly connected. I've used the analogy, all our eggs aren't in the same basket, but both our baskets are sitting right next to each other. And we have seen that fire is happy to jump right over the Continental Divide. It's no longer protected, if you will, that it has been. But we are heavily invested in native water rights in the Big Thompson River, as well as Colorado Big Thompson, Windy Gap, and we're also a participant in Chimney Hollow. We're the third largest. This is an aerial view, if you will, of kind of the beating heart of our water supply, and that's Green Ridge Glade Reservoir, which sits right above our treatment plant, which is on the road out towards Estes Park there. This is, we only have the one plant, the reservoir, about 3,000 acre foot, and it kind of provides our water and last reserve, if you will. It's where we kind of keep our most important savings, if you will, as it relates to that. One of the interesting things about this reservoir, the only way to get water in, and it was constructed this way, is to use the Charles Hanson Feeder Canal, which is a federal canal that goes along and heads into Horseshoe. And so to fill our reservoir, we have to operate under when there's availability in the federal system. They're not using all their capacity. We have a carriage agreement that we then get to use it to move our water. So that's a very important agreement for us with the federal government. Just kind of illustrates the overall, layout of the facilities, starting with the CBT, Windy Gap, Lake Granby, Tunnel, Lake Estes, and so forth, and the various, the Olympus Tunnel, Billy Tunnel. These are all parts of the original CBT system. And we use that to deliver a lot of our water, to get it in the Hanson Feeder Canal and then into Green Ridge Glade, into the treatment plant, and then into town. We also have a direct diversion off the river. In terms of, projected youth growth boundary, we're a bit, I would say somewhat unique in that we are bounded on all four sides. To the north by other water providers, so we're, we will reach build out at some point. We have a maximum size. We're not like Greeley, for instance, that can, or Aurora, that can just, till they hit Kansas, they're. And this gives us a little bit different take, if you will, on water supply planning, because we know that there's we have a definitive target. And this is kind of it here. This is the, kind of a little complicated, but it's from our 2020 master plan. And it kind of shows how we've approached the planning, or planning was approached in that study anyways. So, you have years along the bottom, you have water demand. Here we have an average, and we have a couple of scenarios that kind of band that. And project that out to the year 2060. We probably can't see there, but out towards the end, this projects a water demand of somewhere around 32,000 acre foot. And then this red line here is our current supply, what we think we have, and this is in terms of firm supply. For us, firm supply is defined as 1 in 100 years. Other people, it's firm is firm, it's not, but that's the definition statistically that we've used them. So we're coasting along right now. We think around 24,000 acre foot of firm yield. Our demands currently are down in the 14 to 18,000 acre foot per year range. They may grow like this, they may not. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Part of that depends on how water conservation, what kind of benefits we see from that kicking in. Big jump here is Chimney Hollow that provides, we have 10,000 acre foot in at the 90,000 in Chimney Hollow. So that will provide a big boost in terms of our water supply. We also have our own smaller, what we call Great Western Reservoir, which is basically a gravel pit that will help us regulate water rights, recapture reusable to effluent and those sorts of things. But it actually yields quite a bit of water for us, another couple thousand. Overall gets us to around 31,000, which is about where we think we'll be at 2060. Well, this is kind of what our plan is in terms of kind of an overview then. We are currently planned improvements, kind of our capital improvement projects list, if you will, sort of thing, gets us to our 30,000 acre foot target, which as we said, 2060, and that's equates to a service population of around 152,000, I believe. After 2060, we'll enter a period of reduced demand growth. We're not kind of sure what to expect there, because we'll move from kind of build out to what we kind of call build up sort of a thing. I think we'll be certainly looking at what some other bound municipalities or St. Fort Collins provides a good kind of data source there for what we might see once we enter that next phase, if you will, of development. And we revise and re-examine our water planning about every 10 years. Like this and that there. But we do think our current portfolio is diverse and robust. Um, these are kind of the projects. Chimney Hollow, we do have a change case that we are looking to get going in the next year or two. Great Western, we do, Green Ridge Glade Reservoir, there's an ability to expand it. So that's a kind of a smaller project. It was overbuilt, purposely so that we could come back and expand it at some point. Water conservation is something that we're look as potentially perhaps the low hanging fruit in all this in terms of bang for our buck. So we are making some big strides in that. We recently completed a water conservation implementation plan. Loveland has not had tiered rates in the past, which is one of the kind of fundamental water conservation tools, if you will. But we do expect those to pass this spring. We also would be putting on staff a full-time water conservation coordinator. So I think between those two, we're really looking to get some traction and get some water conservation in the future here. And then regional, there's a number of opportunities to work with nearby and other communities where we can kind of take one and one makes three. A lot of this is kind of water rights related. So for instance, Johnstown birthed Little Thompson Water District. For their water rights that they take out, that they use, they need return flows in the Big Thompson River. We're ideally located that we can provide those for them. We can then trade those return flows for wet water, whether it's CBT or Windy Gap or whatever else. And so we're working on a series of agreements where we will trade that kind of prevents them from having to build facilities in the Big Thompson. And likewise, we need return flows to some of the Thompson ourselves. So there are plenty. This is kind of just one example, but there's other opportunities for regional cooperation. Kind of the main issues that we're seeing in terms of reliability and vulnerability, fire is by far, in a way, the biggest concern right now. And I'll show a couple maps, but we've had between Cameron Peak Fire in 2020, which was came into the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition, or Big Thompson Watershed, as well as the Alexander Fire that happened last summer. And I'll show you the burn area, but it came very close to our treatment plant, the Green Ridge Glade, and it was all the alarm bells were ringing at that point, sort of. Fire is definitely something that we are very concerned about moving forward. Beyond that, drought and climate change, I think, is a big uncertainty. You see how we kind of try to plan out to 2060, but is the water supply in 2060 going to look anything like what it is now? We're assuming that is, but I think, in future master plans, we get a better sense of the direction and the speed and the impacts of what climate change are. We need to factor that into this as well. And that is likely going to change this. And it's not going to be quite as rosy. And then we're very concerned about the Colorado River Basin and the issues going on. Half our water comes from the Colorado River Basin. Any disruption, regulation, additional regulation, reduction in those flows will directly impact us. I mean, right, as soon as they kind of come to fruition. So we're very, very interested in those and concerned about how those may go. In terms of supply development, Chimney Hollow, Great Western, water conservation, those are probably our three big stakes, if you will, kind of moving forward. And this is something I don't know if Shane's going to talk about it or not, but it's kind of an emerging concern that we're seeing. And that's because of the issues with the Colorado River Basin, to some extent, being not a great place to go invest money to go get additional supply because of the uncertainty about compact and whatnot. And northern Colorado is kind of seen as a potential target, if you will, for metro communities. And so this was even on the news last night. I don't know if you saw it out Castle Rock, in a large $1 billion project. They're proposing with the lower South Platte. And so that, if we continue to see that, Thornton Pipeline's another one that's certainly been in the news. Windsor has a concrete example of something that happened to them. But as we see those metros kind of creeping up here and coming up here to look for water and then to take that water out of this region, it's going to undermine the economic future of northern Colorado. And it drives up all of our water prices because now we have to compete with Metro for that water. So that is definitely kind of an emerging concern at this point. This is the Cameron Peak Fire, the footprint. 200,000 acres, about 12% of the watershed is part of that. And we continue to see ash flows and water that we can't divert and that sort of stuff. Now, we're fortunate in that we can, when the black water comes, we can turn off the pipeline and pull out of the reservoir. You know, there's certainly a lot of black water that comes off that. And then this is the footprint of the Alexander Fire, much smaller, just about 10,000 acres, but really close. I mean, came right up to the Charles Hanson Feeder Canal. And in fact, that's the Hanson Feeder Canal is where they were starting backfires. That was kind of their line of defense. But we were very close to pulling out all of our people out of the treatment plant. It was just had the winds come up and we've been going in different direction. This could have been a completely different story. So
Todd, would you mind talking about like what you did to prepare or like agreements you had in place, or was it just kind of chaos?
for this,
Yeah.
well, we have since 2020 and the Cameron Peak Fire and the East Troublesome Fire, most municipalities really, a lot of us have looked at, wow, this is a new thing. So in the 4 years, we have done emergency drills. And and Larimer County opened an emergency command center in Johnstown. And the year before, we had run through some desktop scenarios and we had run through this exact scenario. And I don't know if that was bad karma or what, but it was a very similar type of scenario where there was a fire at Charles Hanson Feeder Canal, that sort of thing. Part of the other part is that's our only treatment plant. We do have interties, so in an emergency, we can get water from Fort Collins, Loveland, we can get water from Greeley, we can get water from Little Thompson, but they're little interties there. We would really at that point be down to limiting water deliveries to hospitals and schools and emergency centers pretty much at that point. So there's certainly, I think, some additional redundancy and some resiliency we need to work on to build into our system. Because we did kind of get lucky in that in this occasion. That's it.
I think at the end, discussion. All right, go on. Oh, go ahead.
So, are there opportunities to work with the Forest Service on upgrading properties to mitigate potential fires in the future?
Yeah, we have as a result of the Cameron Peak and Greeley has these, they call participating agreements with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Forest Service. They run for 5 to 10 years or something like that, and they allow us to participate with them on restoration cleanup sort of thing, but also move into. There's a lot of things. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. And what we do with the biomass, you haul it out, you mulch it, you burn it. I mean, there's a lot of complications associated with that. But it's, you know, it needs to be done. So there's certainly a lot of work going on.
All right, I'd like to introduce Shane Hale, who is the town manager for the town of Windsor. He's fourth generation Coloradan, Navy veteran, husband and father of two. He's been working in Colorado local government for 20 years, which includes time as an intern in Poncha Springs, town manager for the town of Grand Lake, city manager for the city of Cortez, and current position as town manager in Windsor. So with that, Shane, go ahead. Thank you for being here.
All right, hey, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's just an honor to be on a panel with Sean Chambers. I'm gonna put that out. I appreciate him showing up 15 minutes late to show us. I'll say that. I'm your fault. I actually wanted to kick this off with a couple of jokes about unemployment, but unfortunately, neither of them work. So I'm gonna just jump right in. Now, all right, this is the season. So, we've got a pretty fancy map up here. I mean, honestly, we probably stole this from Northern Water or Green. Our system isn't that complex, but it makes a nice slide. So the town of Windsor is about 26 square miles. And we basically have, 3 different districts in Windsor. We have everything that is west of Colorado Boulevard is served by Fort Collins, Loveland Water District. So they're not our water customers. Everybody who's north of Harmony Road is in the North Well District, so they're also not town customers. And so we basically have this dark blue section here. So when the town of Windsor looks at our potable water supply, right now we're serving about 26,000 people, even though the town itself is about 45,000, right? So and then I'd also just mention the town of Windsor doesn't actually have any of our own water treatment plants. We have 3 different contracts. We contract with the city of Greeley, we contract with Fort Collins Loveland, and we contract with North Well Water. So they have their own individual customers that are not ours, and then we contract with those 3 different suppliers to provide all of our water treatment. So what else would I mention there? I don't think much. We talked about this chart a little bit, but like everybody else, we use basically 3 metrics. We use firm yield, planning, and then average yield. And so the city managers and developers really like to talk about this number, average yield, right? This is the best years, this is the wet years, nothing's going wrong, and we have plenty of water in these years. But all of our water resource people like to talk about the firm yield, you know, how much can we guarantee, right? And so that's kind of the rub. And so when we get in and we really try to figure out, do we have enough water this year? It's, well, so far, I mean, how many times has it snowed in northern Colorado, right? How much snow do we see in the mountains? What's this next year gonna look like? And I'm guessing northern water is scratching their heads a little bit concerned at this point, as is everybody. So one thing that's great about Windsor, and I think a place where Windsor is led like no other community in northern Colorado, and I would say probably even in the state, is with our development of our non-potable systems. So in the early 90s, Water Valley, as they kind of kicked off, really kind of pushed the idea, instead of doing a full potable water supply and irrigating outdoors and indoors, asked the town if we would kind of do a little pilot with them to see if they could develop a non-potable supply and how that worked. And so we kicked that off in Water Valley, and less than a decade later, in 2003, we said that worked so well, we're going to just make it a rule in Windsor. So we actually codified that, and any new development in the town of Windsor, basically since 2003, has required a non-potable supply. What that means is basically we're using about 50%. You know, our water indication is about half of what you see anywhere else. We mandated it's basically owned and managed by the HOAs and metro districts. Simply put, if you see a field and it's a cornfield and then later it's houses, all the water that went to irrigate those crops have now just stayed on the site. And so we don't have to build any new ditches. The return flows are still the same, right? They just water a new crop. You know, it's Kentucky bluegrass or whatever that heck they planted, and hopefully it's not bluegrass. I shouldn't have said that. it's some kind of less thirsty crop that they keep on the site, right? So I think it's been a really innovative thing the town has done. I think that it's and that picture isn't that great. I'm gonna move off that. Well, don't look at the picture. I'm gonna update that slide later. I think it is that's happened over time. It's really created a system for the town where we've got pretty known demand, where we look at our like per capita use and our per person use is significantly lower than any of our regional partners because it's all going indoors, right? I think that we're at about 80 gallons per day per person. And I think that when you look at other entities, they're targeting around 130 gallons per person per day. So anyway, that's something we've got going on. Since we put that in place, obviously our dual use system, that's the red line there, has increased dramatically. Now been doing retrofit, but over time, you've seen our dual use system spike. And so again, 2/3 of our users in town are having a potable system. As I mentioned before, it keeps, the benefits are, the ag users still benefit, right? When you look at like just the physical flow of water, if you have water in a ditch, all your downstream users need you to continue to use that water because you kind of pull their water down, right? And so instead of taking and diverting that into a water treatment plant, using chemicals or anything else, we basically just keep the water flowing the way that it always has. It also stretches our water treatment plant. So these are multi-million-dollar expansions, right? So as you increase the water treatment plant, you spend a lot more money. We don't really have the peaking demands in the summertime. When you look at our water treatment plant, in January compared to July or August, the amount of volume is exponentially different. So we keep a pretty flat demand. And then obviously there's environmental benefits, right? There's no reason to put fluoride on your grass, right? You don't really need to treat water, to put it on your lawn, your plants. So Windsor has been, like Northern Colorado, but I think really illustrated a lot of growth in Windsor, right? It's still one of the safest communities in Colorado. Our schools are phenomenal. I hear the town board is extremely good looking. All right. A lot of people want to be there. A lot of people want to be in Northern Colorado. And so we've had just tons of growth over the last couple of decades. But it's, I just think contextually it's kind of a hard time to grow. When I look at our large partners, when I look at Fort Collins and Greeley, and all the huge public works projects they did over time, and I'll go back to that graph in a minute, but the town of Windsor right now basically has CBT water. That's how we've grown. Development has come in and we said, okay, give us CBT. That's the Cadillac standard. And so we've had CBT as we've grown. We've never gone and done a major public works project. We haven't built our own reservoirs, water supply. And so now that we have kind of grown up and we're ready for that, we're in a pretty tough regulatory environment. So I just put in the population. So Greeley in 1970 was just under 39,000 people. Fort Collins was about 43,000 people. That's more or less where Windsor was in 2020, right? And so now I look 55 years later, and we're trying to do these major supply projects, and the cost of water, the availability of water, and I think the regulatory environment is so much different. I don't know that the mayor of Greeley actually went in a backhoe and dug this. I wouldn't be surprised, right? Like 70s were a looser time, right? It's just linoleum and disco and our big project, our big moonshot has been NISP, right? So you guys talked about that a little bit earlier. So for the town of Windsor, this is kind of the last project we will need. I showed you our map earlier, and so like Loveland, we know how big we're gonna get, right? We're surrounded by everybody. We touch Timnit, Severance, Greeley, Fort Collins, Johnstown, Loveland, right? Some would say that makes us the center of Northern Colorado. I would quote them. But because of that, we know our defined area. We know that NISP is our project. It's 3,300 acre feet. It would effectively double our water supply. Like Loveland, it would be basically put half of our supply on the east slope and half on the west slope. Same kind of idea. We've got finally our record decision. We're kind of ready to go. Fort Collins, I did just add a couple years ago, 1041 regulations. I see a city councilor here, so I'm not going to mention that a whole lot. I'm not going to look at her, but anyway, we're working through and trying to do our big project here, we're still kind of facing hurdles. And so that's why I didn't change our cost of $150 million, because honestly, until we actually get in and build it, we're not certain, right? When I started, we talked about NISP was a $900 million project, and that was in 2018. And now it's 2 billion plus. So good Lord, right? And so the costs keep on going up and these delays keep on going up, and that's our project. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I would just say one thing that we've been fortunate to have is really good regional collaboration. And so I'm really happy to have Loveland and Greeley on a panel with me, because I just want to take a moment to tell you that these kind of agreements and collaboration with them means a lot to Windsor. So a few years ago, we got into a 10-year drought lease with the city of Greeley. So it's 350 acre feet. We define drought as basically a 65% or less quota with CBT, because that's our main water supply. So if we have drought conditions and we have less water, we have 350 acres we can pull from our friends in Greeley. And then just about a year ago, the city of Loveland, we entered into a 500 acre foot agreement with them. And it's also a 10-year agreement. It doesn't have that drought contingency on it, but it's really similar. It was framed basically on that Greeley framework. What that has meant for us is that, I'm going to go back to this graph. So this is our CPT water. The red is our northern Poudre irrigation, which is just CPT coming through another source. So here our firm yield is basically, we're using all of our CPT water now, right? In a firm yield in the drought year. We did bring on one more water supply, which is Glick. And then these next two bubbles are basically Greeley and Loveland, right? So if we have a drought contingency and until the big purple one, which is this, comes in, we're really relying on our partners, right? And so this is really for us, as you see, if we have a wet year and a normal year, it has plenty of water, we can continue to grow and not worry about it. But if we have a couple of drought year conditions, we're going to be wholly relying on our partners until this comes in. So do I have anything to say about that? No, that's a better picture. I should put that, I believe. So I think that's kind of it. I just talked about how hard it is to be Shane Hale, which I think you can all agree looks hard. So any questions? Something about Sean's jacket, I think it looks nice. But very handsome, Sean.
Any questions for Shane?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that having a non-potable system for irrigation is only really financially feasible for new development, correct?
Yeah, I think that's a really good assumption. I think going in and retrofitting, that infrastructure would be really cost prohibitive. And so a big benefit in Windsor is that so much of our growth in the community has happened in the last 20 years. And basically it happened after we put this regulation in. So I can't imagine going in at any large scale retrofitting. I think if you looked at some municipal projects like, town parks, other high water users, you could do a project one-off, but to just go into neighborhoods, tear them up and put in purple pipe would be tough. And then, so you have that first outlay. And the second one is, well, what water are you going to put in there? Right? So because regulatorily we've said the water stays on site, you don't get to sell it. You have to keep it here and serve your development. It's worked out. Yep.
Curious on these new developments, do you have any fallback if these non-pot systems fail? Like if the wells fail, they don't have money to rebuild those, do they have?
Yeah. And it's
Just to the potable system?
and they can have wells, but typically these are all ditch rights. So typically, these are all ag rights. So you do see some wells. But if a metro district says, geez, our well dried up, we don't have the water, we say, go and buy more water, so it really is kind of a metro district issue. We haven't really had the supply issues as much. We have talked a little bit about maybe water dedication and maybe the developer underwhelmed there. But typically it's been the cost, right? We've heard from the metro districts and the citizens saying, geez, we're paying so much for our non-pot system now. They're charging us so much for this infrastructure. The town needs to lean in. Yeah, sorry, we can't help you out. Yeah.
I've only looked at 1041 from the account with oil and gas, are you thinking, and if you don't want to get into it, that's fine, but are you thinking that 1041 would prevent NISP potentially, or something that a struggle in the
Yeah.
path to
I'm
completion?
gonna do this here, so. Right. So my perspective on the 1041s is that it's gonna be another hurdle for the project, right? It's gonna slow it down and it's gonna make it more costly for the users. A little bit more perspective, so when we were going through, before we had our record decision, there's a lot of people objected to NISP. And like Xavier Pooter, Fort Collins objected, quite a few others. Again, I think that NISP is better than the alternative, and I should have mentioned that before, but, so we had some objectors, and one of the big cries we heard is, we want more water to flow in the Pooter River, right? Don't take it out from the source. And so as a concession, we agreed to basically take roughly half the water and run it through, the Pooter River instead of taking it out earlier. But we have to get that water back, and we want to get it back before it goes through all the sewer treatment plants, kind of downstream, right? It's a lot higher cleaning charges, for the water. So the pipe we want to run to take our water back out, that's what's going to be 1041 in Fort Collins. So it's just a little bit frustrating that we tried to work with everybody to address their concerns. This wasn't a part of the project, right? And then we're being regulated on kind of our mitigation measure. So it just feels like, okay, well, if we had enough, put the water in there, we wouldn't have now be 1041. And I should have said, the alternative in NISP, the whole region is identified. There's 15 different entities who've said, we have 40,000 acre feet of need, right? And so you guys might have heard of buy and drive, right? You just go, I bidder buys water, you drive to the old family farm and you take the water. Is that really a better method than working collaboratively through Northern Colorado to have a lot more exchanges going on, a lot more mitigation? So I think, NISP is hard because we're identifying so much water needs, there are going to be impacts. But we know from the state demographer that people are coming, right? We know in the next 20 years, this region is going to double in size. Now that may slow down a little bit. They're saying now with our cost of housing, maybe that's going to slow down a little bit. But I'll tell you, in Windsor, we've done 800 plus residential permits this year. It doesn't feel that slow yet, right? So that's not 1,800, but it's 800. So I still think NISP is the most environmental alternative that we have, given the fact that people are going to come and we develop the water. So, yeah, so I don't know that 1041 would necessarily stop it. I just think it's gonna, again, our numbers hit 2 billion, is it gonna be 2.5 billion? And who ultimately pays for that? Especially in a region where we're talking about affordable housing. We're looking at kind of resiliency for the region. And Todd brought up, our competitors in the metro area. Everybody sees the Thornton pipeline, right? We had mentioned, in Windsor, we had the city of Aurora that came, and the town of Windsor and the city of Greeley were talking to a water right owner in Windsor. We're negotiating a price per foot, and Aurora paid more than double what we had on the table. And it was consent agenda, $26 million. I don't even think their council flared their nostrils at that number, right? And so, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to illustrate. So it's, we see this competition and we know that this water one day is gonna move somewhere. And I would argue, and I think anybody here would argue, that the water is gonna be our economic building blocks, right? Once it leaves the region, it's gone. And so, anyway, that's what I think. Yep.
You talked about what you're doing in the water conservation arena, the decouple sort of the growth from the demand.
Right, yeah, so we're doing, we have got a water conservation specialist that we hired as well. And it's really a high impact position, but it's low volume. So our person, who I think has worked for Fort Collins and Greeley, so we try to hire people that are well seasoned. He goes and meets with homeowners every year, but he basically gets 4 a day, right? They're really time intensive. He spends about an hour on the site, measures the water, so he spends about half the day doing inspections, the other half writing reports and sending them. And then he spends a lot of time out of season doing audits in town for construction, making sure our water use is low. So we've done that. We have our typical
water conservation targets for the town. Like I mentioned before, we're about 80 gallons per person per day per capita, which is really a low number. And then Windsor's a lot newer, most of our housing, so most of the housing waste you'll see is in old appliances, shower heads, those kinds of things. And so we don't really see those efficiencies, but we're doing the plans and we've got the person. And again, I think with our non-potable system and so much of our treated water that's going to be indoor use, I don't know that there's a lot of leverage for us to pull. But I think, I talked about it before, we really are trying to push and get away from Kentucky bluegrass. It really isn't an appropriate crop for Colorado. So we are trying to slowly push away, but we've got a lot of affluent people who like to see new green grass in front of them. So, kind of a challenge.
Great, thank you.
Okay, all right.
I will introduce our last speaker for this session, who is Sean Chambers. He's the Director of the Water and Sewer Department for the City of Greeley. He leads a dynamic team of wastewater planning, engineering, and operations professionals. Joined the city in 2018 and brings a vision for increased collaboration, resiliency through planning and demand management. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from CSU in Agricultural and Natural Resource Economics, and is an alumnus of Water Education Colorado Water Leaders Program. He's also the chair of the South Platte Basin Roundtable. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Good morning. Shane is a tough act to follow. I was jotting notes. I have counterpoints to everything. No, we have a lot of good regional cooperation, and it's an honor to speak with these two gentlemen and to share a little bit about what we do in the water supply business. I'm really blessed to work for the city of Greeley, and our water and sewer board has a history that goes back to the 50s of trying to take the politics out of water. And they essentially provide some cover for the council. So when we have to make big, courageous decisions that have political impacts, you have an independent board out helping to advocate and make those decisions, and providing some stewardship for the council and the city in that way. So I'm going to talk about a few things. I tried to limit the slide deck to accommodate for our time. I want to talk about sort of, as Shane's slide noted, we have this legacy of water supply acquisition and everything we've done to kind of prepare our city for its current position in the world and its future growth. And then also talk a little bit about policy planning and how we plan to get to the future. Talk about water quality management. We'll touch on some of the fire recovery stuff that Todd noted, and talk a little bit about customer experience and water conservation, which are really both key initiatives for us. And the purpose today is just to share insights with you and then answer your questions. So I want to make sure we reserve some time for that at the end. Similarly to both, really all of the communities in northern Colorado, we have a significant amount of our system that's based on the Colorado-Thompson system. So depending on what water rights you account in our portfolio, somewhere between 35 and 55% of our portfolio comes from the Colorado-Thompson project or the Windy Gap project, both West Slope, Upper Colorado River water. We have an awful lot of water that we've acquired over the years from agriculture, and that it's in permanent leaseback. And that's why I would say not permanent leaseback, but it's in long-term leaseback. So leases that are between 10 and 25 years out to ag. And so if you don't count that water in the portfolio, our split is much more like 60-40, really reliant on Upper Colorado River water. As we start to bring that water out of the leasebacks, then the split shifts, right, in percentage terms. But long and short of it is we bring a fair amount of water over from the Upper Colorado. We have significant water resources from the Cascadura River. We get a little bit of water out of the Upper Laramie. There's a tunnel that comes under. So hard rock miners built a tunnel under the divide, bringing water from the Upper Laramie into the Upper Poudre. The water law around that was Delph Carpenter's first interstate compact case, preceding the Colorado River Compact. And he learned an awful lot about negotiating interstate compacts in the Laramie River case. We are a little above 50% owners in the Lake Loveland, Boyd Lake, and Seven Lake system. And that goes back to the 1960s. And a lot of the reason wasn't an intentional effort to encroach upon Loveland, but rather the water stored in those lakes has been used to irrigate farms, mostly down here in our service area, in our growth area, and areas between Loveland and Greeley. So it was a very strategic move to acquire those water rights in the 60s, but it was done with the intent that Greeley would grow west over that farmland. So we wanted to be in a position where as growth happened, we could take that water in dedication. And so Blickwater or Greeley Loveland Irrigation Company water makes up a big piece of our portfolio too. So we have this legacy of planning that goes back really to 1870 when the Union Colony was formed. Before they had even platted the colony, they were digging the number 3 ditch, which provided water to all of the original colonists, and it runs right through the middle of the city. It's a great amenity and an asset, but it still provides a really high value in terms of how we augment the river, keeping the river whole, and then also making sure that we have water for agriculture around the city. We built the water plant up at Bellevue in 1905, very visionary, built a lot of wood stave pipe, more than 35 miles of wood stave pipe coming from Bellevue to Greeley. People rode horses and drug wagons out to repair it. Really quite remarkable for its time. And then, so I love this. This is the water, sort of the council / water board at the time. And here they are today. Their attire has improved a little bit. But they have the same common vision of making sure that water resources are available for the community and that we're providing safe, reliable water. This map or graphic is great in that it shows the tan area is our existing municipal city growth area, and the green is our long range growth boundary. And so we're around 115,000 people in this existing area, and then we have the ability to grow as much as 4x depending on how density materializes. Right, when you go north of Greeley, you have a lot of ranchettes here. And if the growth land use pattern continues that way, we don't expect as much density up here. But we're seeing a bit of a push to have some urban density north of the river. And then we're all familiar with the I-25 effect. And so there's a lot of density, apartments, that type of thing moving towards I-25. So we do expect to, at build out, be more than 400,000 people. And in the water utility space, we are taking steps daily in our strategic planning, our acquisitions, our development of storage to make sure that we're ready for the 50-year horizon and then ultimately for build out, right? We have a comp plan that says we're going to serve all of this. And so we're trying to make sure we're prepared to serve all of it. Some of the anchor principles that help guide us in the work that we do daily. Strengthening infrastructure is a place that we always make sure we're investing appropriate staff skill set, appropriate budget, and an appropriate balance of our commitment. So we have a lot of existing infrastructure. We want to make sure we're strengthening that and then expanding the system as appropriate. We want to also make sure we're continuing to acquire water and that we're developing the storage that helps maximize that water's use or value, right? Creating firmness so that water that we're storing or buying can be resilient through drought. Then water efficiency programs, really working on that per capita per day number, making sure that we're doing our best to be efficient and wise with the water supply. We know that as we acquire water and we bring it in from the farms around us, we're drying up agriculture. We're essentially drying up an economic producer as a neighbor. And so we want to be sure that we're being as efficient as possible with that water supply. So we're not drying up any more farms than we absolutely need to. In the water efficiency space, we've also pivoted a little bit. If you pay attention to the water efficiency world, there's a lot of seeking of return on investment. So how can you spend a utility dollar and get the most water savings back? And a lot of that comes with like turf removal programs, and you're using state or local money or a mixture of both to subsidize people tearing out bluegrass. And you often require them to show up at a public meeting and bring all their receipts for how much soil amendments they bought. And these projects can get into like the $10,000 or $20,000 range for a reasonable sized lot. And they yield a tremendous amount of savings, like the ROI on them is great. But if you think about who they serve and help, they are only serving upper crust affluent customers. They totally miss people who can't get to an evening meeting, who can't finance 60% of a $10,000 project. And as a manager of the financial position of the utility, they're also eroding the revenue I get from the most affluent customers. So they're not really helping me maintain a stable revenue stream either. So we're starting to shift and ask ourselves a lot of questions kind of in the environmental justice framework. How do we help our most vulnerable people in the community save water that would make a real impactful and meaningful impact in their daily lives? People who, if they could save $10 on the water bill, that really makes a difference in their monthly budget. So we're looking at, where can we replace, old dilapidated fixtures, so toilets, washing machines, dishwashers in bad rental situations or other places where, we don't really care who owns the property or who owns the fixture. We just want to get the old inefficient one out and get a new efficient one in and try and save both water and that revenue. In the planning space, we've got an adaptive management framework. We looked at scenario planning, which is now, the best practice in long-range water supply planning, as some of these gentlemen talked about. Like picking a supply and a demand number out in the future is pretty tough. There's so many uncertainties and variables that affect how we grow forward. So we're trying to do more adaptive planning. So we're looking at multiple scenarios and preparing for multiple futures. And then focusing on customer experience and public communication, making sure our customers know what we do, what we're doing for them, and that we have their interests at heart. A little bit about how we're organized. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip that. Here's a short list of recent master plans that we've undertaken, and they really touch all areas of our business. A number of them focus on infrastructure. And that's important. Until 2020, we really didn't have full infrastructure plans for our non-pot system, our water and wastewater collection system. And so as we grow west, really, we've got some challenging topography, and we really needed to figure out how we would best serve all of that. We've also got a great water efficiency plan, a drought response plan. The drought response plan has some financial elements to it. So in a severe drought, not only are you wrestling with making sure you have enough water, but you're also going to have a really drastic revenue shortfall. And so we keep essentially a drought reserve, and we had really struggled in the planning on how to size that drought reserve. And our most recent experience with it that showed it to be insignificantly funded was not a drought, but in fact, a really excessive water year where we got so much rain that no one watered, which I never saw coming. But it showed us that our drought reserve maybe needs a new name and more money. And then maybe one other one that's wrapping up this year, telemetry controls and cybersecurity. This is really an emerging space for all utilities, one that we're tracking and concerned about. EPA has a law coming out that will obligate us all to do a lot of regulatory things around cybersecurity. But it's also about resiliency, how we operate the system in emergencies or other scenarios where we want to operate remotely, but we don't want anyone else to be able to operate our system remotely. Future demands. So, like most utilities, we've seen a 25% per capita per day savings over the last 25 years. Essentially, our demands have held constant despite all of our growth. And that's great in a whole lot of ways. It's a little bit challenging in managing rate revenue because, we're increasing rates to try and capitalize, paying bond indebtedness to build infrastructure, to be future ready, to replace aging infrastructure. Yet we're not seeing any increase in demand. But we also know that this last 25 years has been an inordinate period of efficiency gains. So the leap from really inefficient toilets to more efficient toilets and the same across the number of fixtures and the replacement of a lot of turf grass, you're not likely to see another 25-year period with that same level of efficiency gain. So the question for most of us in the planning space is like, when will demand start to more closely track population growth? We know that they're going to eventually, but when is a real critical question. And it plays into both how we plan for water supply, but also how do we financially plan for the utility solvency. Real quick, so it cut off a little bit, but essentially this is like the cone of uncertainty, right? Next year, we have a pretty good idea how much water we need and how much our customers are gonna demand. But the further we go out here, we have no idea, exactly what weather climate will look like. We don't know, how we will grow exactly. Will existing zoning come in our land use area and request a whole lot more density? If those things come to fruition, we're gonna need a lot more water per acre. So the further you go out in time, as we get to 2080, there's a whole lot of uncertainty about how much water we'll need. And so we are trying to plan more adaptively so that we're monitoring things every year and being responsive, but we know we could end up this low. And if we buy a whole bunch of water and we build a whole bunch of super large infrastructure and we end up down here, we've overbuilt, we've overbought, we've extended a lot of debt and a lot of rate impact on the customer base that was maybe undue. But if the future ends up here, we've maybe underbuilt, right? And we're struggling to meet service reliability goals. And so that's why the adaptive management scenario planning is really a valuable tool. So integrated water resource plan, integrated water resource planning is the best practice in the modern era, and it looks at these various scenarios. Basically, we found or concluded about our system that we have more than adequate supplies to meet all of our short-term existing needs and to manage growth. But we need to continue to build a robust portfolio, and that means changing some of our agricultural supplies. We have a lot of water in leaseback. We've got some water that's been used for agriculture historically and never changed for municipal use. So we have some change cases that we've got to do. And if you've been through water court, it's expensive and difficult and never fun. We've got to continue our strategic acquisition of the right kind of water, and we're really struggling internally with balancing like what's really cheap, affordable water to acquire. And will that cheap, affordable water be available in a future climate change type scenario? We know that, if more snow falls as rain, if snowpack comes off earlier, the way water rights are going to be administered will be simply different. And the likelihood is that senior water rights will be much more reliable and resilient. A little bit inherent in their name, they're senior, than junior water rights. Junior water rights are much cheaper, so we can acquire a lot of junior water right now very affordably. Senior water is incredibly high in demand, and every metro district in Larimer County, the city of Loveland, the city of Greeley, the city of Windsor, we all have treatment plants that are essentially quite close to each other in a pretty short run here against the foothills, and we're all competing for the same types of native water that goes into those treatment plants. So there's no place that a market is more like frothy with competition than right here in northern Colorado. So that it's a real struggle, I think, for all communities to figure out how do you balance affordability in acquiring water for your future with reliability. As you know, I think Kellen came and spoke to you about Terry Ranch, which is our aquifer storage and recovery project. It offers, it's an alternative essentially to expanding Milton Seaman on the North Fork of the Poudre, a much more environmentally friendly one and one that can be built out and phased over time. And so we need to continue to develop the infrastructure that connects that aquifer to our system, and will ultimately allow us to divert water from the aquifer and store water back in the aquifer, treating it like a water bank or a storage bucket with no evaporative loss. And then we'll continue to implement demand management or conservation programs, monitor our demand growth over time, monitor how land use is evolving and how population is growing, and our supply conditions, what's happening in the watershed. Are there impacts from wildfire? Are there impacts from warming climate and how much falls as snow versus rain, et cetera? A couple of things on infrastructure. So, the picture at left is the Terry Ranch pipeline. That's the first phase. We're trying to build it incrementally, so we minimize the impacts on ratepayers. But it's an expensive project. All in, the Terry Ranch project will have about $350 million of infrastructure. And we hope to spread that out over about 50 years, minimizing the rate impact to our citizens. We have a lot of examples. We are still building a 60-inch pipeline that connects the Bellevue treatment plant to Greeley. That project started in 2010. And phases first went through LaPorte in those early years, and it now ends down in Windsor, right across the Poudre River on 257. And we're planning to build the last phase of that pipe in. So that's an example of a project spread out over 15 years that is really a future focused project, but it allows us to spread that cost out over a long period of time. And then this is a great shot of Chimney Hollow. We're a 10% partner in Chimney Hollow and love what that project does for the region, both in water supply storage, but also in recreation. And it is a fascinating project to watch construction happening on. That's like the very first ribbon of asphalt on the bottom of the dam a couple of years back. I think Todd covered Chimney Hollow, but again, we're really excited about what it does. It offers Greeley about 9,800 acre feet of storage and firms up our West Slope Chimney Hollow or our Windy Gap rights. And with the other elements of our system and our ability to pre-position water in Chimney Hollow and then move it up to other reservoirs and then into our system, we think this adds a lot of reliability and flexibility for the whole northern Colorado region. A little bit more Terry Ranch pipe, just finishing our first section. We've built 8 miles of this pipeline thus far, and then we'll have another phase in 2026, 27, and then we'll pause and make sure that we know when we really need the rest of the pipe to be built. But we have all of the easements and all of the governmental approvals in place, so we hopefully don't get caught in a Thornton-like situation. Water quality and watershed health is a challenge that all municipal utilities are really struggling with. And, I think, sort of as Todd alluded to, there's been, 100 years of fire suppression in our watersheds and a lot of fuel growth. And some of the watersheds are, characterized by tremendously difficult terrain and topography to get into, not really accessible by mechanical equipment. In the Poudre, there are 4 wilderness areas where you really can't do management. And we've tried to do post-fire recovery with non-mechanized strategies in those wilderness areas. And not been told no, but been told if you want to do recovery in wilderness, don't plan on doing it anywhere else. And the Forest Service has had tremendous budget cuts. They have no seasonal staff in the year ahead. So we have been chasing federal money to help the Forest Service recover their land, which is our watershed. And we hired our own outside design consultants, and we have to hire our own third-party NEPA analysis consultants to evaluate the plans we designed to recover the watershed. And then if all of that is approved, then in this really short construction window, you can get in and try and do something that keeps the sediment out of the river. Because when the sediment gets into the river, it looks like the bottom picture and you can't treat that. We still had 5 events this past year. So 4 years out from the fire, we had 5 days where we had to turn the water treatment plants off. And luckily we relied on Colorado Big Thompson water, and that's a beauty and the flexibility we all have up here. But in total, we've been off more than 70 days because of fire-related water quality that looks like that bottom picture. That's our diversion at the bottom photo is to our municipal treatment plant. And it still looks like that on rare occasions 4 years after. So the story about all these layers of bureaucracy and paying consultants, the reality of that is that for like every dollar you try and put into fire recovery, you get like 10 cents that actually hits the floor of the forest. And there couldn't be a more inefficient way to recover forest. And there's a lot of forest that's not yet burnt that characterizes our watershed, and so there's a lot of concern. The fire this past summer was very fortunate that it was put out the way it was so quickly. One other program that is eating up a lot of our energy right now is just the lead and copper identification and replacement program. We no denying this is really important work, but it is really detailed and data-driven work. And those of us who have older systems didn't keep, amazing records in 1910. We are going through handwritten tap cards and drawings and relying on, did people identify the material that was put in the ground? And unlike Denver, who used lead up into I think the early 60s, Greeley stopped allowing it in 1939. So our subsection of houses that could have lead is much smaller, but the battle to know affirmatively what's in the ground on the private side and the public side, and to document that and then to go replace what has to be replaced is a huge effort. And our interpretation is that we as a utility are ultimately going to be held accountable to getting all the lead out, whether it's on the private or the public side. And so we took on a commitment when lead was identified or galvanized downstream of lead, which qualifies, we're going to go pull it out. And so we got a $20 million loan from through the state revolving fund. 10 million of that is loan forgiveness. So it's like a grant. But we're gonna end up putting somewhere between 10 and $12 million into pulling lead out, mostly on the private side. And then maybe the last, I know we're getting close to time here. So we talked a little bit about our water efficiency plan, and the direction that that's continuing to head. We're always going to offer great education forums for any customer so that they know where to get resources. They know what's on the plant list for water efficiency. They have demonstration gardens to go to. We've implemented AMI across our system in a phased approach. We're down to the last 1,000 meters out of 25,000 meters, so we're pretty excited about that. AMI is just advanced metering that gives you real-time data. If you want it, you can get reads every 15 seconds. And in addition to being a great data tool for conservation, it also offers a really great customer interface. The customer can get text or email alerts when they have a leak. The algorithm in the software does a great job of identifying leaks. We had a number of water board members who had persistent small volume leaks that were caught through the software. It really does have a good ROI on the investment, and it's a great customer service tool. It used to be someone would call and say, hey, I didn't use that water last month. I was on vacation. And we would say, well, the meter says, and we'd have no data between point A and point B to have a conversation about. With this granular data, we can say, well, actually, it looks like on the 25th of December, you had this huge spike in use, right? And they were like, I wonder what the cat sitter was doing or whatever that conversation looks like. But now we have data to inform the conversation, whereas with one month or one read a month, you just couldn't have a good conversation. So AMI has been a blessing that's been well worth our investment. And it really goes to conservation and efficient use. And then we always want to make sure that through our planning, our landscape and design standards, that for existing and new customers, we're making sure that they have a landscape that can be irrigated. It can be irrigated affordably, and that we're setting up the community for a healthy and resilient landscape that they can afford to keep looking nice. So those are kind of the key tenets of our efficiency plan. And I'll close by just saying, the challenge that Greeley faces, and like other communities, it's in line with what Shane said about being a new community too, is that we're really challenged by meeting the needs of growth and our existing citizens and our aging infrastructure, and doing that in a framework where we can control cost. And then you add things like climate change and cybersecurity threats, and the scarcity of water resources in this region, we've really got some difficult challenges to wrestle with, and investments in good people and partnerships and relationships help us navigate that space effectively. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
That a big leap, or is it not that much?
It's nominal. If you already have a need for a meter replacement. So that was part of what spurred us to do it. We were starting to see a lot higher rates of failure in our meters. And so we needed a meter replacement project anyway. And these E-series meters, which are just an electronic read, were efficient. And so I want to say that I think the delta was like $38 between a traditional meter and an E-series. It was really nominal.
Other questions? I have a lot of questions.
Shoot.
What, like, with CBT and communities relying on CBT, are communities like Greeley and others planning on a reduction? And what would those plans entail? Is it like regional sharing, kind of what you were describing with other communities?
Yeah, I think we should all be planning for a reduction on the Colorado River yields. I think our Colorado River Commissioner, Becky Mitchell, does an amazing job advocating on our behalf. I also would say Northern Water, in the hiring of Kyle Whitaker. If you've not heard Kyle Whitaker's name, look Kyle up. Kyle used to be the Division 5 engineer in the Colorado River Basin and came over to work at Northern Water and knows the administration of the Colorado River with great intimacy and is one of the state's preeminent experts. So Northern, I think through, their existing structure, but adding Kyle is a great advocate for us as CBT holders. But I think the reality is that, everyone's going to share some pain eventually. There's going to have to be sacrifices. And I think the Colorado River District and agriculture have been very careful to say it can't all come from West Slope Ag. Front Range municipal diverters have to share in the pain. And so I do expect, longer term, I think we should be looking at 5 or 10% reduction yields in Colorado Big Thompson water. Same potentially with Windy Gap. Windy Gap's, a little bit more vulnerable because of its junior status. So how that plays out, I think remains to be seen. But I think we have the right people doing a lot of advocacy on our behalf, and that's a good position to be in. But long term, I think there's just a tide of climate change and reduction in the real flows in the Colorado River Basin that even with really, really substantial changes to how the lower basin uses water, the upper basin is going to have to give water. And how we manage that here is a different question. I think we have a long enough runway that I think we all just need to be taking steps to diversify our portfolios and become more resilient to that fact. And I think that's happening. There are great numbers of smaller communities who used to be exclusively CBT, and they are starting to change native ditch shares.
Thank you. One other question I had, the past several years, we've kind of had this boon of federal funding for infrastructure. How are you anticipating, and kind of for all of you, there's probably a decrease in that funding availability?
We've tried to take advantage of it as much as possible. And I know others have, that opportunity extends far beyond the municipal water utility across municipal services, right? There's a great opportunity, or has been, to access very low cost money or giant grants. I guess we're in the mode, honestly, of just trying to capitalize on as much as we can, as quick as we can before the spigot turns off. And then what we do going forward will be adaptive management. But I would say, I think in the water utility space, we're lucky to have the Colorado Water Resource and Power Development Authority, who's had a long tradition of essentially funding water and wastewater infrastructure projects for municipalities. And they do that by taking EPA money and then leveraging that. They make loan guarantees, which allow you to go out to the bond market. They'll go out to the bond market and borrow $200 million for 10 different communities, and then they'll guarantee the loan with the bond market. And they'll do a whole lot of extra diligence to qualify the borrowers. But that works. It's very low interest money. It's usually, 2 or 3% lower than the market rate. Greeley hasn't borrowed a lot of that money in recent years because the market rates have been so low that you couldn't get enough savings. One challenge you have with all the federal programs is it comes with Davis Bacon, Buy America, Build America, and some of the time you add all those costs up, both the infrastructure and the reporting requirements, and your project ends up more expensive than if you just went to the bond market and paid the market rate. So actually, that the environment with higher interest rates creates a greater separation and makes that borrowing more attractive for us.
Any other questions?
Thank you all. Appreciate your interest in water.
Break, we'll come back at 10:35 and start our next round of talks. Thanks everyone.
Just send him over it down. Is it? Question.
Yeah, right. See anybody.
And then. All is resolved. Not even the share that she was.
Yeah, it's really great job. And we talked about the read itself, like the reports.
Yeah.
So like, I didn't realize you could see I don't know, across the legs and see Chicago.
Sometimes, just get convincing.
Yeah.
It's a long time ago. Yeah. All that.
That, I mean.
You probably got a turn.
You wouldn't even pay attention to it.
But you could have house
Some of the job is
there was a down. There's possibility when it was downstream. And I think that. We can't say, hey, always got. Warren, I'll figure it out. I don't know, it was I don't even know the tolerance to for some of the stuff.
Since you call it lead it. Every day.
It's right, like, it's the, well, like, I also got this project.
Yeah, we're also
living out of it. It's like, oh. He's like, I thought I was like, look, these guys. But when it comes through the walls, this way, it was right. It's like, so I didn't know I was even before. Yeah.
So kind of go back here, I think more advantage of that lake front. It seems like very different. If you're, it's not. I mean, it's probably someone once a year, this would be. Part of it. I've been there in February. Like in there, like waves of police and galvanized. Yeah, for as far as you know, we walk over. Yeah, so
Monitoring it, like,
change whatever you
concentration. In the water. So they say the water.
We were like, thinking of.
Should be. And look at. Sure.
Yeah.
Looks like it has decoration.
Oh, you're up there for 40 years?
Yes, that's lead. So there's still, it's all. And then the galvanized pipe is like, what's brown? Yeah. It's
It's rusty. You know,
It's, you know, like.
and in theory, it's still, it needs to. You're doing far for me, yeah, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important. So then we move to a use. That's what we get out of there. And it reaches more south operation. Like I replaced my galvanizing. So in that area. And I tried to repair it first, and what I found was. You know, we know it's going to. That's what they always talk about. The more exposed. It's going to be like, what's still the same. Yeah, do that. That first year I was here, sewer probably the car. Why someone did the actually.
About
But.
how it's needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
I sent pictures, that one of the future ways of me grabbing myself.
Wait.
First time, February, because you can't, well, they just think that we're so prepared in this longer recession or in a recession. Yeah. I go back, like, the trees are nice, and so just all that was in the. So we have to go this right now. And so we still own it, I'm sure it's great. It has. Well, they don't have to worry about water, you know. That's much. No, yeah, that's right. When I did my first, when I introduced ourselves, that's where I came out in France. And all that first movie channel, like 39, almost a common to goodness. Or else trying to come down. So it's like, well, it's just ready to get. Then, I got to this like, does this thing, has been this. But it makes sense, right? Something was waiting for some. And it was a big stone you did. Hasn't been really recent, right? Probably. So this other fish trap was around. These sort of warm them around. And I'm guessing it was probably from when the pseudo went straight into the trees. Yeah. Like, they have pipes that made it to different houses, but then it didn't go to the tree. What they're, it just like went down to the creek. Looking at it, the trap was the tree. I'd be, I don't think anyone had liked this thing for the next 75 years. So that's what brought this stuff. Otherwise, it's like, well, yeah, 2 days. So there's always an unknown joy around the next corner of the little mountains. It's one reason I like Bill Condon. It's Eric, we're about it. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Just crazy.
And then you're. And then there's seat here or it's here that I can drive. Yes, and so there's the, I just have for you.
Yeah.
So.
Oh. I can go out. I'm going to last. Okay, the tree starts, right? My turn is like. It is right. We were like. Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah.
We save everything.
And then we went and visited.
Some of them.
But again, we started.
Yeah.
You're right. This firewood are, they were stole. So at the end of the art of stole, what is the direction? For like, running now, they can see ready to RVB driving. Drive here. For me, so to speak, that's what's, and, we go on just. When, there's some minutes, we have an important, I mean, right, they were just, after all, it's the same thing. And yes, as we say, so now you've got to pay for the So like South Star, there's people who are really, they are remote liberals, who are not. It's not restricted. And then some of them are sweet tea and there's time flies for you. They got, they were finally, regionally, water. It's been strawberry. Then they have. Yes. Well, then we'll get this. But I think it's real. That's right. We're not gonna. It's gonna be a problem. I think when you go back.
My dad works with just. We got that especially. So we'll have to figure back.
We all actually have a lot of professional spaces here. We through this helps in one great stuff. And when we start this now, there's no 200 right? I didn't measure birth chest. Yeah, they're this most people. We should say everyone was happy, but they stick their choices. So, you know, technically,
Like it's engaging.
there's someone. Debbie helping right there.
We
don't really matter. It's just. Last year.
Well, but you know, like, I feel like, yeah, well, like, but some people like, just like.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. Okay. All right, we're gonna get started with our next kind of session here. We've got, first up, Marielle Miller, who is the Water Conservation Manager for the City of Fort Collins Utility. She spent the last 7 years developing and implementing programs, policies, and plans to manage water demand through efficiency and conservation, and oversees a team of water conservation professionals focusing on this work. She has a Bachelor in Environmental Science and a Master's in Public Administration. And I think maybe that got cut off.
That was it.
Okay.
That should be the end.
Thank
That's
you
good
so
enough
much,
anyway.
Marielle. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to present to you all. My name is Marielle Miller, Water Conservation Manager, and I won't ask that you all introduce yourself, but I'm really curious if you can just give me a show of hands, how many of you are, work in the public sector for government organizations or quasi-government? And then the other side, maybe private or commercial business. All right, so mostly public sector. That's good to know. And how about live or work in the city of Fort Collins? Great, looks like about half. Excellent. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about Fort Collins Utilities supply and demand. I am obviously on the demand side working on water conservation efficiencies, so it's going to be a little heavier in that area, but I will try and touch a little bit on our supplies. To kind of give you the water by the numbers, this is all 2023 data because we typically do our reporting early the following year, so we don't have 2024 numbers for you quite yet. But we serve about 80% of the city's population. So Fort Collins Utilities is this blue area on the map. There's other water providers. I think you're going to hear from one here later today who provide water within the city of Fort Collins as well. We treat and distribute about 8 billion gallons a year. That equates to about 22 million gallons a day on average. And we serve about 35,000 customers. Large majority of them are residential. We also have award-winning water. Why we have so many good breweries in town. So we get our supply from two different sources, the Cashilaputer River, which we have some native water rights on, and then also Horsetooth Reservoir, which is part of the Colorado Big Thompson Water Project. So that's West Slope water. In any given year, we're doing about 50-50 from both of those sources. And we're lucky to have that redundancy. So if there's high turbidity or water quality issues in the Poudre River, we can switch over to the Horsetooth source. But we really wouldn't be able to survive with just one of those sources. We do rely on both of them. We have some supply challenges. Most of those relate to climate impacts, less snowpack, the issues with Colorado River Basin that are still being worked out and probably will be for a long time. And that particularly impacts Horsetooth Reservoir water, not Poudre River water. Earlier runoff can be a challenge for supplies. More frequent water restrictions can result from water shortages or water quality impacts. And then stress to trees and landscape as a result of those water restrictions from a water shortage. And we have really good water rights on the Poudre River, but we lack enough storage. So some of you may have heard of the Halligan Reservoir project that we're currently in the process of finishing up permitting for and hope to construct in the next couple of years. All right, so I work with a team of 7 other individuals. We work primarily on creating, implementing, and evaluating various policies, programs, plans. So we're really focused on helping the community or helping our service area in particular reduce their water use. So reducing their demands. And we work closely with the supply side because obviously supply and demand go hand in hand. And some of our biggest issues are climate impacts, as I mentioned, where you're getting less water supply and you're seeing demands go up with hotter, potentially drier weather. So you're kind of squeezing that water resource on both ends. And that's really the focus of our work at a very high level. We started our team back in 1977 with 1 person. We've had some kind of legacy programs that have been around for a while. You might have heard of the sprinkler checkup program, previously the sprinkler audit program. That's been around for 22 years. So we've got some programs that have made a lasting impact throughout the community for some time. In total, we have about 16 programs. These are incentives. They're voluntary programs that customers can participate in, and they are indoor, outdoor. They are opportunities for all customer types. So whether you're residential, multifamily, HOA properties that are just irrigation only, or commercial, we have something essentially to help anyone who's wanting to reduce their use. We also focus on education and customer support. And lately, as we've been, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but we've been updating our water efficiency plan. We're recognizing the need to continue some of the voluntary efforts we've been working on, but leaning a little bit more on maybe some code changes or regulations as well to be able to further increase the demand reduction efforts that we've been working on for quite some time. So this bar chart, can everyone see this okay? I'm not in everyone's way. What happened in 2020? I think most of us know what happened there and why we might see a dip in our estimated water savings from the programs that we offer. In large part, COVID, people weren't going to take advantage of a program where someone had to go into their house and do efficiency upgrades, for instance. Can anyone guess what happened in 2023 where we saw a drop there? Yes, yeah. So the moisture really impacted our water use during that time. But in 2023, we saved about 130 million gallons, and that's just from the programs we can actually estimate water savings from. That doesn't include education or some of these other activities or events that we work on that likely, could have some estimated water savings associated with them as well. And that equates to about 1,600 homes average annual use. And it's about 2% of our total treated demand. So it's not a huge amount, but I think it's important to remember that the 2%, the savings there in most cases is ongoing. So it can, the life of the savings for a lot of our projects are closer to 10 years. So those savings are cumulative year over year. You can start to build that and really start to drop overall water use. And that's what this graph shows. So the bars are gallons per capita per day, which is a pretty common metric that different water providers use. It's also a very confusing metric. And typically you don't want to compare gallons per capita per day across water utilities because they're likely going to be calculating it differently. So just a caution there. And then we have our population in the dark blue line, and this is just of our service area, so it's not the full city population. And you can see we've steadily made decreases. So since 2000, we've reduced our use 42%, and that's where that cumulative savings comes in. So water conservation efficiency it's a long-term game. It's not short wins year over year. let's see, our current water efficiency plan goal is 130 GPCD by 2030. And the 5-year average, this is a little bit of a typo here, but the 5-year average prior to 2023 was 138 gallons per capita per day. So that the typo there is it should say 2018 to 2022. 2023, we saw a huge drop. We essentially met our goal in 1 year, about 130. We're at 122. But it's not likely that we're going to stay at that level. That was largely influenced by the precipitation and moisture that we received during the irrigation season. And what we're seeing now for 2024 is much closer to the data that we saw, for the use data that we saw in 2022. So we're likely to see that bar kind of go right back up to 139 or somewhere near that. This bell-shaped curve, I'll explain it here a little bit more. We've got months on the bottom if you can't see it, and then we've got gallons on the x-axis. Is that the x or the y-axis? Having a brain fart there. So the blue is commercial, and the solid blue line above that is our average commercial use over the last 3 years. So the solid, the dash blue line is average residential use over the last 3 years, and the solid blue line was our use in 2023. And the same is true for commercial, where you have the solid blue line is the 3-year average, and the orange line is the commercial use for 2023. And you can see significant reductions from the prior 3 years average. And in large part, again, that's due to the irrigation that we saw, or the precipitation that we saw during the irrigation season, which was about 123% increase from prior year's average. Overall, our treated water use was down 13% in 2023, a pretty substantial decrease. And I think there was some concern about our revenue as a result of that. Now, that's going back up, and that concern, I think, has been relatively alleviated now that our water use is back up to kind of our more traditional or normal levels. This is a breakdown of our different uses in various customer classes, both indoor and outdoor. So the pie on the far right is a breakdown of the residential, looking at single family and duplex versus multifamily, and there's indoor and outdoor for each of these customer classes. On the far left, you'll see residential, indoor, outdoor kind of rolled up, and then you've got commercial, indoor, and outdoor there. Now in 2023, again, because of the precipitation, 35% of the total use we attribute to outdoor use. Prior years, and it's pretty common for us to see something closer to 40%. So in 2022, it was 43% outdoor use. So it's a substantial amount of our total water use is getting applied to landscapes. Some of our demand challenges are growth, although within Fort Collins utilities service area, we have more limited opportunity for growth than other areas of the city. We're fairly built out. If you recall, the map of our service area is very central. So what we'll likely see there is more redevelopment. And in talking to our folks in planning, that redevelopment will likely look more like converting commercial to multifamily. So we will see an increase in use over the years, but I don't think it's going to be quite as significant as some of the other water providers within the city. We have limited availability or limited legal ability to use our water rights for reuse and great water. So that's an issue in that that's a potential tool for a lot of other communities. Leaks are a big issue, both in people's homes and businesses, so after their water meter, as well as within our distribution system. Nationally, the average is around 10% of all treated water ends up or results in a leaked water, wasted water, and ours is around that average. There are many outdoor opportunities, but there's lots of challenges related to outdoor opportunities as well. There's the knowledge and ability to be able to design those outdoor landscapes, especially for DIYers. There's the knowledge and ability of how to maintain those and water them appropriately. It's very different than what a lot of us are used to with traditional kind of Kentucky bluegrass. There's the concern about trees. If we're converting irrigation that was previously spraying grass and we're converting it to drip irrigation, are we adequately irrigating our trees? Which there's so much value in our trees, and they provide shade for some of our landscapes, which also result in less water use of that area. So we want to make sure that we're preserving trees. And there's also just the behavioral piece. I think a lot of us have a kind of set it and forget it as far as our irrigation clocks and schedules go. And that's a challenge when we're trying to monitor our water use and make sure that we're watering adequately for the landscapes we have, but not in excess. I think a lot of our low hanging fruit has already been picked. As I mentioned, we've been around for a long time. We have lots of voluntary kind of incentive-based programs. And there may be a need if we're wanting to actually reduce our use more significantly, because you've seen from that GPCD graph, we've kind of plateaued a bit aside from last year, that we might need to be looking at some other things, development codes, for instance, or other opportunities where we might be able to get a little bit deeper savings. Rental housing is a big challenge for us. So about 40% of the residential units within our service area are rentals. So whether it's single family or a unit in an apartment, for example, it's really hard to reach or to make changes in those types of rental situations where we have a tenant and who maybe doesn't want to make long-term improvements to a property, understandably. And we have a landlord who maybe, you know, it's easy to pass along the water costs and it's not a big concern. So there's an interesting dynamic there that we're trying to better understand and work through. And then affordable housing, it's a huge priority and challenge for the city of Fort Collins, as well as others throughout the nation, really. And so we're looking for ways to be the solution. And I think there are some creative policy opportunities for us there that we're currently exploring in creating opportunities for people to design and develop new developments, both indoors and outdoors, that would correspond to a lesser water use or lesser water need, and then they would pay in accordance with that lesser use. So not just having standardized methodologies to calculate that water supply requirement, or tap fee is another common term that people use. And then, as I mentioned, climate impacts. Hotter, drier means less supply, and we need to make sure that we're managing that supply and demand adequately so we're not seeing gaps in the future. And then last but not least, I just want to give a plug for our water efficiency plan update. This is our 2015 plan. So we're about a year overdue for updating state required plans that need to be updated every 7 years. We are looking to complete ours and hopefully get council approval mid-year 2025. And that plan has some, I think, pretty unique aspects to it that we haven't seen in a lot of other Colorado communities, utilities, water efficiency plans. So we're doing an equity analysis and better evaluating the equity of each of the kind of strategies or measures that we're looking at. We're integrating it with the One Water kind of planning approach. So we're working a lot with the other water utilities that are within the city to help find ways to leverage those opportunities and create synergies and look for kind of win-wins or co-benefits. And then we're developing a demand model that'll look at climate impacts as well as evaluate the water savings of some of these strategies and measures that we're looking at, so we can better understand what's possible with some of our conservation and efficiency work, and what amount we might need to increase that to help combat climate impacts in the future. So if you're interested in more information, the website's there. And I think that's it. If there are any questions?
HOAs would, like if it was a condo association, would pay for the water and then it would come out of the HOA.
Yeah.
Is there a new requirement as we're looking to redevelop some of that commercial space in the multifamily that there would be more than one water meter per building?
Yeah.
If not, is that a thought that you could have?
There is not currently a new requirement for that. That's something we are working on. So there's an opportunity to allow for more meters, but there are challenges with different separations that are required between like a water line and a sewer line, for instance. And so it requires us working with utilities engineering as well as planning staff to figure out how we can kind of more creatively design some of these systems. And then there's also opportunity with sub-metering, but challenges with that as well. So sub-metering would look like having individual meters attached to each of the units. Fort Collins Utilities wouldn't own those sub-meters, we wouldn't manage them, but there'd have to be some maybe development agreement for like a new multifamily, for instance, that would hopefully, require them to be managing the individual water use adequately or and charging an amount that's appropriate for that use for that particular unit. But it's a big issue because we see indoor water use per multifamily to be much higher than indoor water use per single family. And it's in large part because you don't have any insight to your water use. Your water use is likely just kind of tacked on to your rent or whatever that might be. And so there's a big behavioral component there that typically will increase non-metered units by about 10 to 15%.
Two questions. The rental use in Fort Collins, what was that percentage?
About 40.
And the gray water limitation, was that because we have to return back to the flow or?
Yeah, so my understanding, and my understanding is pretty limited on the reasons why, but our water rights related to Colorado Big Thompson water, so our Force Tooth project water, limits our ability to reuse the water because those return flows need to go back into the river and then be used for downstream users. So we have less limits on our Polluter Native rights, but because we're mixing these two and blending these two systems, and it's challenging to like account for whether we're getting it from one source or another. I think we've taken a conservative approach to not. Yeah, so the gray water that we do allow, because we do have some allowance for gray water, is whether it's new construction or redevelopment, we allow gray water in commercial and residential developments for urinal and toilet flushing only. So the limitation there, I should have been more specific, is that it can't be used for outdoor use. Because when it's used outdoors, it's consumptive and it's not going back into the system and being treated and released back to the water, to the river.
Any other questions? All right, let's do our next speaker, and I don't know, did we say Nick's going next?
Yeah, I got chosen.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, well, Nick Wharton, he is the town manager for the town of Severance. He has a graduate certificate in historic preservation, an MA in public history, and an MPA with a concentration in local government from University of Colorado, Denver. He started his career in local government with the city of Denver and then the city of Boulder as a historic preservationist. In January 2014, he was awarded the DOLA Best and Brightest internship for the town of Severance. And since then, he's been kind of promoted up the chain. And in June 2018, he was appointed by town council as a town manager for Severance, where he is still currently employed. Thanks for being with us today, Nick.
Thank you. I appreciate it. My name's Nick Wharton. Thankful for being here. Last year, I was actually on that side and I was welcomed back to be on this side. So it's a little different to be on this side. So bear with me since it's the first time I've done it for this group. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about the demand side, but I'll put a little bit of the supply into everything. I wanted to kind of give a little quick background on Severance. Not a lot of people know where Severance is, even though we are growing and becoming a lot larger. I put it in perspective for the almost 11 years that I've been there. I'll be with the town 11 years in January. When I started, our population was about 3,500. 1,200 residential units, around 10 employees. I was the 7th employee, and we had an annual budget of about 2.8 million. Going into 2005, we are almost at a population of 12,000 now. We have about 4,500 residential units. We're at 41 full-time employees, and our budget that was approved last night was 21.6 million. Been a lot of growth in our town over the last couple of years. So how does that affect water? The biggest one is our growth management area. I was able to find a 2011 growth management area, which was about 30 square feet. For those, is everybody familiar with growth management area? What we can expand to, it's what we've agreed upon with all the rest of our communities around us. If you look at ours now, we're almost at 90 square miles of growth management. We've almost tripled. And we do have annexation. I couldn't find the annexation map, but we do have annexations on each point of those sides of our town. So we go all the way down to 392, the main road that goes through Windsor. We now have an annexation all the way up to County Road 90. And then we go all the way to Colorado Boulevard or Weld County and Weld County, Larimer County line, and all the way out to Weld County Road 27. So we have very expansive area now. Actually, yeah, I'll go with that. So looking at just kind of our water supply, we're very unique. In 2001, we had no water. The town didn't run our water system. It was run by North Weld County Water District, and we had no supply. In 2002, the town purchased infrastructure for North Weld to create our water service area. It stayed pretty much the same. We have annexed a little bit of land in there, but for the most part, since 2002, it's stayed the same water service area. When we first started, there was no water for that. I can't find records. I don't quite know how we serviced it. I was able to find records of, we started to get a little bit of water in 2002, not much, it was 7 shares, not enough to service any type of a town. And then we slowly started to get our water supply. In 2023, or 2003, we purchased our first good amount of water, and we became a wholesaler with North Weld Water or County Water District. Now, as of 2025, we own all of our own infrastructure in the ground for our water service area, all of our own storage area, and we own our own water portfolio. Since I've taken on as town manager in 2018, or I started taking over our water about 2016, that's why the records are there. You can see the jump in supply that I've been trying to be able to make sure that the town has. We are now water independent enough that if we have a drought for 10 years and we only receive half of our water, we'll be fine. We don't have to put any water restrictions into the town. We can still stay asked. Doesn't mean we won't, because conservation needs to happen, but we have the ability to service even if we only got half of our water service. This is where I want to talk a little bit more about demand and what's unique to Seventh. In 2021, we had to place a moratorium on everything in the town of Severance, and it was because of North Weld County Water District. For those who don't know, they had trouble with their supply, which affected pretty much everybody in the northern Colorado region. For those who had other types of supplies, it didn't affect them as much, but we were dependent on just North Weld. All of our treated water comes from them. It still does. How that affected us, in 2022, we had to cut our budget by $2 million. We halted all commercial or all construction for about 10 months. We had several home builders and realtors that pulled out of the town, still haven't come back. Long term, we had a lot of areas of focus where we had commercial slated that never came. We're still very much a bedroom community because of what happened during those times. And we still are now just trying to get builders back. The good side of that is we were able to open a little bit of construction in 2022 for what was already approved. Thankfully, because I had that excess water and that excess supply from North Weld, we're able to allow what was approved on our plats to continue to grow. That was about 600 houses. So over the last 3 years, we've slowly done about 100, 150 houses, which is actually a much better pace than what I was dealing with. In 2018 to 2020, we were having about 650 homes a year. I don't recommend that. It's really hard to handle, especially with such a small staff. Then last month, for those who haven't heard, North Weld County Water District did lift their moratorium. That affects everything outside of our water service area right now. So we are starting to see quite a bit of subdivisions, which I think is my next slide. Yes. Start to pop up again. With that happening just a month ago, I now have, I believe it's 6 subdivisions that have already contacted us and are in the process already for either annexation, preliminary plat, or looking at coming to town again. Those equal about another 3,000 single-family units, another 300 multifamily units, and about 75 acres of commercial. One of those, this is the map I was looking for earlier. This is our water districts. So the green is our water district. The yellow is the North Weld County Water Districts. You have a little bit of Windsor in there, who you heard from earlier. But you can see how small ours actually is, our water district, compared to our entire growth management area. We do have one development that is within our water service area right now that is wanting to go forward. However, we cannot service it without creating a new water service agreement with North Weld County Water District, which we are in the process of doing right now. So looking at how do we plan for that type of demand with our supply? Before 2018, I'll be honest, there was no planning. Really, the town of Severance had no planning for anything water. They were just shooting off their hip and hoping for the best. The only thing that was a single plan that was for the town was we had a 2011 comprehensive plan. There was no other types of plans for the town. There was no redundant connections. We had one master meter. That master meter went down. There was nothing for the town. We would lose our entire water service. We had minimal on-site storage, 1 million gallons. It's minimal for where we are. It was big for back then, but still very minimal. And we only had one source of treated water from North Weld County Water District. Post 2020, since I've taken over in 2018, we've started to actually create plans. I like to say we're growing up and becoming an actual town. We have comprehensive plan, we have transportation plans, we have water master plan, we have our water efficiency plan. Pretty much everything that most of your municipalities would have, we now have plans for. Trying to focus on just water. We did get a second redundancy connection, so we have 2 master meters now. So if something happens to the north, we can still get our water from the south, vice versa. Storage wise, we just completed and yesterday went online a 1.5 gallon elevated tower. So we've more than doubled what we had. And then we have the space and plan for another 1.5 million gallon to start in about 5 to 10 years to make sure that we also have redundancy going forward. We've secured our water portfolio like I've talked about. And then we've put tons of restrictions on developers going forward. You are not allowed to build in the town of Severance unless you have a non-potable system now. I tentatively put that into place with our council back in 2018 when everything was starting to grow. So all of our newer subdivisions already have that, but it was never really written in stone. Finally, the council this year wrote it in stone. So it is in our municipal code that you cannot build in town of Severance unless you find a non-potable system for outdoor watering. We've also changed a lot of our raw water requirements. The council no longer wants me going out to try to find water for our water portfolio. If you are a residential builder, you will be bringing your water to the town of Severance. Now I have obviously connections that I can put them in place with so that water can still come. That's not the same for commercial. Through economic development, we are willing to work with commercial to try to find that water if they bring the cash in lieu. But for residential, since we are focusing more on commercial right now, residential will need to bring their water. The other thing that I didn't mention in here is working with, because I don't see it, emergency connections. We've had no type of emergency connections with other districts around us. And so we've started conversations with the city of Greeley. We've started conversations with the town of Windsor. I've had a few conversations with Fort Collins, Loveland about looking at different connections in case of an emergency and actually working with the City of Thornton. We all know they're building a huge pipeline right now, and I'm in the middle of an agreement with working with them as well. So we have additional water that way. It's not water, it's just being a good partnership in northern Colorado. If something happens to us, we all need to look at each other's backs. Which kind of goes into my biggest issue we have still right now is just we still only have one provider of water. If something happens to North Weld Water District, there's going to be a lot of us in northern Colorado that has an issue. So how do we fix that? There's a group of, I guess I had other things. Our plan for the future, I'm gonna skip over that. and go into kind of the regional, water planning that a lot of us have been working on. There's a group of about 18 participants that have been in, participants in NISP. I don't know if you've talked about NISP yet. 4 of those entities, which are all in this room, Severance, Windsor, Eaton, and Fort Collins Southern Water District officially last year, this year created, the Clearwater, Regional Water Treatment Authority, which is a treatment authority that is in the process of looking at building another local treatment plant and the distribution lines to help service those 4 entities going forward. This for Severance is big because it gives us another water supply that will allow us to be able to service our town for the future. We won't be as dependent on Northwell. We're still gonna stay with Northwell. We have no reason not to. They've serviced us for long. We've put a lot of money into their infrastructure, but we also need to secure our growth for the future as well to be able to handle anything else. That's all I have.
Does that only apply to the Severance water system, or is it to the whole town and includes Northwell?
Good question. It is to the whole town. Northwell does have the right to waive it if they want to. We do have one subdivision that they've brought in to the Northwell that does have have one that doesn't. There is one that's being looked at right now called Buffalo Creek, that they are planning on bringing non-potable and working with Northwell down. It's our preference that they do bring it just for conservation, but Northwell, it's ultimately their district, so they can waive it if they want to.
Questions?
Thank you.
All right, next up, we've got Chris Fletcher, who is the general manager for the Fort Collins Loveland Water District. He joined the water district in 2019 as a district engineer and has over 25 years of experience in utilities and engineering, specifically with drinking water and sanitary sewer systems. He's a licensed professional engineer. And in 2022, he transitioned from his role as district engineer to the interim general manager, and then formally selected in April 2022. So thanks for being with us today, Chris.
Great.
And we'll get you pulled up here in a second.
It's interesting to sit here and have the luxury of going last, and I can hear the other presentation, so hopefully I can provide some contrast today. Fort Collins Loveland Water District is a different form of local government, and it's unique. It doesn't have all of the features that a full municipality has, and that constrains and also focuses the work that we do. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And yet water connects us all. And so of all the entities that you've heard from, we're connected in one way or another through agreements, through water sharing, through infrastructure with those other entities. And it's fascinating to talk with others in these kind of environments and realize that we're connected in all these different ways, but each with our own perspective. And so, for example, City of Fort Collins, we have a lot of interface, and this is our version of the graph that you've seen from others. We are the tan color here in the middle. We serve part of the Fort Collins GMA. You can see the City of Fort Collins, which is well into our area, but we also serve the Loveland GMA and the Timden GMA. We have 4 municipalities that we work under and unincorporated Laramie County. So every thought that we have has to go through an evaluation of 5 different jurisdictions that we don't control, but we react to, and we provide water for those areas. So it's a little complicated. Development review is an interesting challenge. We actively watch what each of the different land use areas are doing for land use planning, and we build our water projections off of that. But we also need to be a good partner and be flexible and adaptable, and continue to supply water, because without water, those developments can't move forward. So we are a necessary building block, but a system that we don't control all of the levers for. And that's an interesting challenge. We are a Title 32 That's Colorado Revised Statutes, Title 32, Special District. Special districts in Colorado, they're not special because they're cute. They're special because they're narrow focus. Our special district purpose is water delivery, but you can also have a special district for a library, a fire district, a health district, conservation district, things like that. Our mission is water. And in fact, I'm gonna switch to the next presentation. How do you,
Wait, just because they're separate PDFs, you might have to.
we can just leave it on that screen, that would probably look.
You think that's fine?
We grab.
There you go.
There we go. So I brought up our mission here because I think that that helps crystallize this. The Fort Collins Sullivan Water District provides sustainable, high quality, secure, reliable, and cost effective water. Water is what we do. We don't have a mission for affordable housing, as valuable as that is. We don't have a mission for historic preservation. I've got a story to tell about that. We don't have a general fund to do community betterment projects, as valuable as those are. That's part of building a community, but we're just a water slice. We don't have sales tax revenue, which drives incentives for commercial development. So we don't have an incentive program because we're not benefiting from that with sales tax revenue. That's a part of a municipality of building commercial infrastructure, so there's sales tax revenue coming in, it becomes a revenue source, but we don't get that. So it really focuses us on water and that water nexus for everything that we do. Special districts are a little different than homeowners associations in that we can issue debt. So we're like municipalities that we can take on debt, but we're like HOAs that we're typically on a smaller scale. Now, our district is a little larger than most special districts. We serve 65,000 people water. That's close to half of what the city of Fort Collins has, and it's 4 times what Severance has. So we're a fairly large organization. Our budgeted revenue for 2025 is about $60 million. So there could be a perception that special districts are the closet where a full municipality is the big house. But it all depends on the context. For example, Spring Canyon Water and Sanitation District on the south end of Horseshoe Reservoir. They are a 600 tap special district. They serve about 2,000 people. They're very small. They're consecutive to us, which means that we provide water to them, but they're a separate system. They're a very small special district, but organized under the same Title 32. We are a legitimate form of government in the state of Colorado. We have eminent domain powers like a full government. We can issue debt, as I mentioned. We have a budgeting process. We have a lot of the same processes, but not all of the same functions as a full government. In comparison, you said you have 7 people in your department. We have half the population that you do, but we don't have a conservation department. Because conservation, historically in our district has not been driving our water use. And that's changing, but we're just a different dynamic in that area. It was mentioned earlier, if your water use reduction is too great, you lose revenue. And so we're cautious about that. We want to be as efficient as we can and reducing the cost for all of our people. But there's a line where, because we don't subsidize, we don't have a general fund that we can say, we're gonna take the cost of water and knock 20% off and pay for that with somebody else's money. All of our costs have to be borne by our water ratepayers. It's water revenue in, water expenses out. And so we're a little different that we can't provide freebies to people because we don't have money that's not already allocated to our water revenue or our water expenses. When you talk a little bit about our water supply portfolio, I've heard mention today about water storage. When water rights started, they fed agriculture. Agriculture is a seasonal demand, and so when the water was in the river, we were able to put it on fields, and when the agricultural production was done, we needed less water in the winter, and it really matched that annual cycle on the river. But now we're growing people, and people use water all year long. We can't tell our people, just don't use water from October through April, and we'll be back with you in May and turn the water taps back on. It doesn't work that way. So we need to have storage so that we can acquire water when it's available. And sometimes when it's available in excess, store that water, keep that in our region, keep it useful for our communities. But we might not be able to drink all of that immediately when it's available. So storage helps us buffer those seasonal variations in time. As water's available, during runoff, and then we save it and use it at other times. And if you extend that to an annual storage, some of the larger projects, you mentioned Halligan, Nick mentioned the NISP project, we're a participant in that. That allows us to buffer water supply through drought years. So we may have some years that have more than enough for that year, but we can store that and carry it over. The Colorado Big Thompson project is another example of that. City of Greeley that spoke earlier this morning, City of Fort Collins got a long head start on our district. We started in 1961, so we just passed our 64th year. When we started building our district, kind of like Nick was talking about acquiring that water supply, the source that was available to us was the Colorado Big Thompson project. That was easy to understand, easy to purchase. Our district wanted to maintain our ability to purchase water. And I liken that to, we had a grocery list and we wanted to go to the store and buy the groceries ourselves instead of handing that grocery list to other folks who had different perceptions of what water is useful, what they're willing to pay. And they would load up a cart of groceries of water for us and bring it to us. We said, we would rather go to the store and buy those ourselves. And so we use a cash in lieu approach. And that's worked very well for us. That has brought us to a point where 94% of our current portfolio is based on CBT in some fashion or another. And that's, as you talked about with gray water, that's even more limiting for us because we cannot reuse 94% of the water that we have. It has to go back into the river and be released. The other 6% that we have, we actively do reuse. We take credit for that. That's a part of good accounting to be good stewards of the water that we have. But we just don't have a lot of it to recycle. And so it sounds like a great idea that we could just take the output of what we give back and circle it back into our treatment and return it. But not all of that water is ours. There's users downstream all the way out to the state line on the South Platte that use that water. So that's a little bit about our portfolio. We are currently capped by Northern Water on our ability to acquire CBT water. And that's based on the original founding premise from this Colorado Big Thompson project that it should be supplemental to our native supply. So farmers should have some native water coming off of the river, and then the CBT project can supplement that up to a certain allowable capacity. We are currently at that capacity, and because we've been buying more native water, we're hitting that limit. And so we're no longer able to buy CBT water. If you liken it to an investment portfolio, we're 94% in this, have our eggs in that one basket. We probably should diversify. So that's the process that we're working on now, is developing some other supplies that can help provide a different risk profile, a different drought availability, a different water quality, so that if there's a fire in one watershed, we don't lose all of our water there. For example, the fire that we had this past year threatened portions of the CBT delivery system. And 94% of our water is based on that. So if that system was contaminated with fire runoff, we'd be scrambling to find some other source of water. And so we're looking at diversifying that. On the NISP project, it provides a number of benefits for us. One of the most significant is storage. That ability to buffer water from one water year to the next, to deliver water in times of drought when other sources are short. So we've recently increased our participation. Fort Collins Sullivan Water District is now just over 20% participant in that project. That's a significant stake for us, but we believe in the value of that project for water supply and the ability to firm up the rest of our supply by providing flows that we can store from year to year and use them, sip on those supplies in years when we need to supplement the rest of our supply. Otherwise, we have to buy water rights that have a great yield in average year, but in dry years, that yield drops. And that's the margin that we're trying to firm up with storage projects like Artemis Reservoir. We also have some overland trail gravel ponds on the Pooter, North Taft Hill Road, where the Pooter Trail goes through there. There's some big reservoirs, and that also helps us mitigate some of our demands, provide return flows to the river. It's a stopping point when we exchange water up the river. We can store it in overland trail ponds and then either release it or exchange it further up to our diversion at the Monroe. So we try and use storage strategically to extend the life and the use of the water shares that we have. In terms of finances, we're like most government agencies, we track our revenue and expense funds for new growth separate from existing system operations. That's a key concept that we work on educating our customers about, that they don't understand that we have to separate maintaining the existing system and those monthly rates from the cost of new development and building new infrastructure. We're not allowed to take the cost of new infrastructure and put that on the back of existing customers. There's state law that says we can't do that. So we have to keep those funds separate. We have to look at projects as to whether they are maintaining the existing system and they can use rate revenue, or if they're expanding the system because of new growth, and then they have to use the plant investment fees and the one-time costs from new growth to help fund those projects. So we're very aware of that and trying to educate our customers on what those differences are so they understand that it's not just one big pot of money. We actually have rules on how we allocate it, similar to all governments, but we spend a lot of time educating our customers on that. Because our mission is narrow, it's just what I have on the screen here, the sustainable, high quality, secure, reliable, cost effective water. We don't have a mission that includes community betterment. Like I said, as beneficial as that is, or sales tax revenue. It's not that we can't afford to do those things. It's not in our mission, and we're constrained that our charter with the state only allows us to do things that are within that defined mission. So that really focuses us because we can't go outside that. A quick story to illustrate that. There's a irrigation company called the Divide Reservoir and Canal Company in Cherokee Park, the Red Feather Lakes area. They're over 100 years old. They have a number of old facilities there. There's an old blacksmith shop and an old machine shed that are log structures. And I love the log cabin area, the westward expansion part of American history. I see those structures and I would love to do historic renovation. And I think, well, I'm a majority shareholder in that irrigation company. Can't we like pay to do historic renovation to keep that cultural asset there? But it's not the most cost-effective way to deliver water. If we need storage for a piece of equipment, we should find the most cost-effective storage, and that might be a pole barn. Doing a historic renovation, period correct, on a log structure is not as cost-effective. And when we look at that decision, unfortunately, as a water district with our mission, I can't spend money on that historic preservation above and beyond the cost of just providing secure storage for a piece of equipment. So it limits us as to what we can do there. That's a challenge because from a human perspective, a personal perspective, I would love to contribute to that. But when we make decisions as a board, we have to make sure that we're staying within the bounds of the mission and the charter that allows us access to the funds that we have, which are targeted for a cost-effective delivery of water to our customers. And so we're always looking at it through that grid. We talked about acquiring water, that we use cash and lieu process, that really has been super helpful to us. It gives us control over the shopping list of what water we want to build our portfolio with. It helps us maintain compatibility, which is quality of water. It is timing, availability of water. It's the ability to change it through the water court. Some water shares, you get a better yield when you change them, some you don't. We want to control that. So that's really been helpful to us to manage our water supply portfolio, but it means that we have to stay on top of that and make sure that we have water available, and that is a challenge right now. Water is really expensive. We're at kind of a step function in our water treatment capacity and in our water supply that the next phase of our growth is gonna take not an incremental little step, it's gonna take a big step. And that's what we're seeing in our rate increases, is that as we run our capital projections, there's gonna be a major amount of cost needed to do expansions. We're in the process of understanding what that looks like at Soldier Canyon, which is a treatment plant that serves Fort Collins, Loveland, Elko, and Northweld. Northweld and Elko then serve a number of other districts, as do we. Our next 6 MGD of treatment capacity is gonna cost us $90 million, and we need to build that in the next 2 to 3 years. If we don't build that, we can't work with our partner entities and continue to approve growth. We're not anti-growth, but we also don't have some other source of revenue that can subsidize growth, and it has to come from our rates. And so that's the challenge, is these big step function increases in water supply are forcing fairly large increases in tap fees. I have a couple examples to finish up with here that I think would be interesting, and let me see if I can get to the other example here. So what's on the screen here is a typical customer water pattern. Is higher in the summer. There's 5 years of data here. A tiered rate structure. This is how tiered rates work, that the first 5,000 gallons for us is in tier 1. It's got the lowest rate. That's indoor water use that's essential for health and sanitation, for basic cooking, and cleanliness, that kind of thing. We protect that rate as our most vulnerable population. If you go above that, we know from our water use above 5,000 gallons generally indicates some sort of outdoor irrigation. It's a seasonal trend that we can see. And so that costs us more to produce. But it's fairly common, so there's no penalty for that. If you go above 15,000, that's starting to put a strain on our system, particularly in the summertime when a lot of customers are using that high demand, and so our rates for that go up. And then there's a higher tier, and this has been a lot of conversation at Fort Collins Loveland this year. There are people that are using an excess amount of water. As you can see here, approaching 90,000 gallons a month of water on lots that may be an acre or more in size. It's a lot of water. But we have tiers to charge for that. And so from this view, it doesn't stand out as quite the issue, but let me show you this. If we accumulate that water over the course of a year, so there's indoor water use, January, February, March, April, and then in May, we start to see outdoor water use. This line here is the amount of water typically that a residential tap would provide to us. It's based on 1 unit of CBT. We have customers who are going way above this, using 2 and 3 times the amount of water that they provided to us. So if you'll indulge me another analogy, every month that we send out our water bills is like a pizza party. The district has a pizza party, and all of our customers bring their pizza. Some customers have a small pizza, some a medium, some a large, but everybody brings their one pizza. And there's some customers that during the months of May, June, July, August, they consume 2 to 3 pizzas at the pizza party. They brought 1, but they consume 2 to 3. And to the extent that there's other people who brought their pizza but only used half a pizza, there could be some averaging there. But when you have a consistent group of people who consistently eat 2 to 3 times the amount of pizza, it's my job to make sure that everybody's fed. On a water system, you can't turn a customer off when they get to an arbitrary amount of water. They control how much they use. But it's my job to make sure that there's pizza for everyone. So I've got to go buy more pizza on the spot to feed those people who are eating 2 to 3 times what they brought into the system. That's what's happening in a few pockets of our system, and that's what's driving our 4th tier rates. If we go back to the prior exhibit, it begins to make more sense. Why do I have such a high rate here? It's because that water doesn't exist in my system. I have to go find it. And our treatment plant wasn't planning to treat that. That was our future growth capacity, because you have to build plants in certain size increments. But we have customers who are using that and never provision that for us. And so that's just a quick illustration of what's happening with our rates and why we would have a really high 4th tier rate. Because of this excess use well beyond what was provisioned for the district. And so we're addressing that in very specific ways. We don't want to apply that to all customers. Because that's asking the efficient customers who are conserving to subsidize a high amount of water use. I don't want to say irresponsible, but it's unprovisioned water supply. We want to make sure that the water supply that we're providing is within what was provisioned so that we have the treatment capacity and we have the distribution and the raw water to do that. So a couple little analogies to explain some things from our perspective. Districts are a little different, they're narrow in focus. But hopefully this has been interesting and maybe informative. Special districts again, so Fort Collins and Loveland already had city governments that provided water services. Why was the special district created? Yeah. And what void did it fill, and is there a little overlap? Sure, great question. When our district was started in 1961, the city of Fort Collins was north of Prospect. CSU was about the south end of town. And the city of Loveland, similarly, was not as far north as they are now, so they're more like 43rd, that area. So there was an undeveloped area in the middle, and that's where the district came in to begin to set up a water system. There were originally farmers, Fossil Creek Water and Sanitation Association in that area, and they had some infrastructure, but they realized to continue supplying growth, they needed to be a little bit more organized, and so they moved into a Title 32 structure. But at the time that we started, the cities were not there. They did not have infrastructure extended. Now the cities have extended Fort Collins from the north into our service area and Loveland to the south. And we've had to negotiate where those boundaries should be. When the district first installed lines, they were small diameter, typically rural water supply lines. They didn't. As the cities developed into that area, they brought full municipal services, which is water and fire protection, along with all the other municipal services. And it made sense in some areas to abandon the district investment there and let the city take that over. But in other areas that are more central to our system, we already had large diameter lines. We could provide fire protection. And so in those areas, it still made sense for us to serve that. So we have a negotiated boundary now as the city has grown into our area. And there's been some overlap, but we're trying to define a clean line of where we serve and where the city serves. There are some places where we have lines, both have lines in the same street. We try and make that transmission to the city of Fort Collins and not service, but there are pockets where we were there first. And it's just never made sense to build the infrastructure a second time to convert it to the city.
You mentioned that you cannot cut off water to a person, that it's your responsibility to go out and get more water.
Yep.
I'm just wondering is that codified somewhere in Colorado? Is that just the practice in Colorado? Like how is that sustainable?
So part of it is the way the physical infrastructure works. The water meter doesn't have an adjustable valve that we can remote control. And so that's an open 3/4 inch hole to the customer, and it's the customer's kitchen faucet or toilet that determines where the water, whether it goes in or not. Our rules and regulations provide the political framework for how we manage that. If there's an egregious waste of water, we can shut off a service. So if there's a pipeline that's broken and someone's just gushing water to their property, we can shut it off because it's detrimental to our system. But defining that someone has a little too green of a lawn or they're irrigating more than they should, that's a really gray area, and it's difficult for us to have a clean decision of what that aesthetic should be to begin putting limits on it. And then with the infrastructure, we don't have the ability to say, you're only allowed this much and then we're going to turn you off. Particularly for residential, if we're doing that, we're also turning off the basic health and sanitation, which makes the house uninhabitable. And we're very aware that that's a red flag that we really don't want to throw. Now, if people don't pay their bills, that's another way that we are allowed to shut them off in our rules and regulations. We provide a 120-day process, notices, collection efforts, but at the end of that, we will shut customers off if they're not paying. Egregious water use, like a broken pipe, is another mechanism. But other than that, we have to work on good faith with the customer. And our customers are wonderful. When we ask for reductions, we get them. we're very cautious and only asking for reductions that we can justify and have a real reason for. And that's, we have to have a real situation on our hands to do that. And we've had that last year in Timnath, we had that. But the political rules and our rules and regulations govern when we can shut water off.
And those are governed by the board. Those are
Yes,
changeable to an extent.
they are, yep.
Yeah.
Yep, we are accountable to the Board of County Commissioners. That's the appeal level from our district. We very rarely have anything appealed that way, but that is where our government level sinks into state government.
We talk about just how the municipal and county land use and development regulations, like, that's a complicated world when you're serving multiple entities. Can you talk a little bit more about?
I can't comment on how the different agencies all do their process. That's all different, but we take the end result, which is a land use map, and we apply that to the area in our service area. And look at our customers and say, if that's gonna be single family residential, this is what demand we would expect. And we build that out and then we put that into our hydraulic model. So we amalgamate 5 different land use plans in a GIS system. And then use that parcel by parcel to build a future demand projection.
And then you also tracking their changes to landscape regulations over time.
We are, in our rates, we don't set our rates based on what we think the future will be. We let the land use regulations change, and as we see our customers actually use different water, then we adjust our rates based on actual data instead of projections. So that we don't get caught in the trap of a promise for reduced water, and then it doesn't deliver, and then we're stuck holding the bag. So we do our rate analysis in arrears. We check on it informally, internally every year, and every 5 years, we have an external rate consultant that looks at all of our rates and does an external analysis.
Yeah, I'm still kind of processing. I was just thinking about how you have to plan for supply, but you have no necessarily control over demand. Is that correct? We stated?
Yeah.
You can't tell people to conserve.
But you.
We can ask.
It's a policy decision.
Yeah.
You could. if you're
We don't
bored.
control land use code.
Yeah.
We don't have the final say on development, although we're a necessary part of development. We don't have enforcement. And so we can't write fines or citations. We can use rates, that's our best way, and we can ask,
Mhm.
but we don't have the ability to, pass a code that requires watering restrictions,
Mhm.
because we don't have that municipal authority. It's a very interesting dynamic. It puts us in a position that we better be good neighbors because we depend on our customers responding in good faith.
Yeah.
And they need that trust of us that we're only asking when we actually need it. And our customers have absolutely delivered on it.
So you said you can't pass a code, but you can ask your municipal partners to pass a code to help you along, right?
We can. And the municipal code development process is a monster to try and accommodate everybody's interests. The city has their own interests. And so we typically coordinate at the staff level, provide input there, but let the city manage their process. Going back to my analogy of sometimes special districts are perceived like a closet, not the big house. We don't always get standing with the city equal to the city's utility, even though we're serving a part of the city. So again, we can ask, we can suggest, we can provide impacts, but the city process has its own timeline and own process that we're not, what's a nice word to use? We can't dictate to the city what the city does with their code. And we've got 5 jurisdictions that have the same issue, and so we certainly don't drive the conversation for land use code, but we contribute to it and we respond to it.
Have you found that top tier to be effective? Have you seen a response from those users?
The rates that we're talking about, were approved in November and they'll go into effect next year. So we will see next year, May, June, July, the impact of that. We know from other experiences in the industry that rates are the most effective way to change behavior. It gets people's attention pretty quickly, and we spend a lot of effort on outreach so that people see it coming, because we don't want to surprise people with it. But we're expecting it to be very effective. We've seen other rate changes be effective in the past. This one is very significant. We're expecting that, but haven't seen it yet.
Are the majority of those high users personal homes and green lawns, or is it ag, or?
There's two categories. We have an irrigation tap, and there's about a third of our irrigation tap holders are using excess similar to what I showed. And the other pocket is single family residential on a large lot that has chosen to make a very lush landscape, large lot. And that's just a huge strain on our system when they haven't provided that water. So it's some very narrow pockets. We have a lot of ag in our district because we're pretty much urbanized and developed, but the irrigation taps are one of those areas.
Did you question that?
I was just curious how the new rates compare to the most recent ones, like how much of an increase will these be?
Yep. So other than the high tier, our rates went up 30% from 2024 to 2025. That is built into our revenue projections for our budget. The high tier, because we're looking for behavior change, we did not include as revenue because we assumed that people would hear our request and would reduce their usage. So that doesn't impact the budget. That's not the 30% increase. That's a more significant step. That's a signal for behavior change, more than a 30% rate increase. Starting 2 years ago, our external rate consultant looked at our capital needs, looked at our available funds and said, you need to increase rates 30% a year for about 4 years. That was a year ago, but our board said we would prefer to spend down our reserves before we increase those rates. And so we did that last year. The board approved a 5% rate increase when we should have done 30. And this year we've spent those reserves down, or we're on track to do that. And so we need to the schedule of 30% rate increases.
And those rate increases are aimed at the, supply demands and also the infrastructure that you're needing moving forward, funding those, that increased capacity.
Monthly rates support existing infrastructure. So that 30% increase is for us to keep up with existing maintenance of our pipes, our pump stations, the system that exists today. Our new tap purchases, our plant investment fee went from $17,000 to $27,000. That's the new growth component for expansion. And so we put that into an expansion reserve and use that for additions to our current system so that we can serve areas that are currently developing.
So with that, new development fee, like tap fees, water supply requirement fees, would that go to help fund? You mentioned needing to potentially expand filter cannon treatment plant, so would that go towards the expansion? I know some communities have had success in managing demands to help limit at least a portion of the expansion that needs to happen. And it tends to be, I think, in all scenarios are different, but it can be more cost effective.
We are absolutely talking about that. The 3 districts at Soldier Canyon are all fairly different in their demographics. But we're talking about what we can do because the cost to expand treatment is just exorbitant. And if there's any other solution that we don't have to spend the 300 million total on expansion for this next step, we want to be looking at. So we're having that conversation. We just got the cost information a week ago, so it's early in that conversation.
Question? Thank you. Thank you.
You get some lunch. Our lunch speaker, Lisa Darling, has reported that she actually has a flat tire on the highway.
We have time for lunch.
So we have some time for lunch. If we get an update and she's going to still be able to come, but later, we'll probably try and shift to our book reports earlier. So let's get some lunch and we'll reassess where we're at in about 15 minutes.
You should be getting.
I think I'm gonna take off.
Okay,
Got some other things going on this afternoon.
totally, no worries. Thanks for, oh, did you get lunch? Do you want to grab it?
I don't wanna be the first one, so I'll let you guys make sure and make your call.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was very interesting.
It's starting
So
to.
you got a copy of it?
Yes, I do.
The symbols out to anybody, there's nothing proprietary.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
So, yeah.
You look at it.
Thank you.
You want it?
Yeah.
Good morning.
Thank you.
No.